I want to thank you all for joining us today for this webinar on empowering an international education workforce to navigate career uncertainty. A lot of words there, but with hope what we're going to get at is thinking about how the past several months have brought a lot of change and resulting uncertainty for everybody, for professionals across the United States and globally, and including for international education, our allies and our partner. I know at NAFSA where I worked, we've heard from so many of in our community about reductions in force, about reduction in force, about furloughs, about closures, about cancellations, consolidations, and more. And I think as we're going through this change, there are a lot of concerns and uncertainty about our jobs now and in the future. My name is Caroline Donovan White, and at NAFSA, I'm the Senior Director for Education Abroad and Volunteer Engagement at NAFSA. I'll be your moderator today. Before we dive in, a few notes for you. We are going to record today, and we'll post it to the NAFSA website and share a link with you. We've also enabled closed captioning, so you can turn that on for yourself at the bottom of the screen using that icon. And I hope to have time for your questions today. I'm going to ask that you submit questions using the little Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen so that I can focus on the questions. And I appreciate that you're all introducing yourself and telling where you're tuning in from. Thank you for doing that in the chat. A NAFSA colleague said to me yesterday, I think I was kind of upset and overwhelmed by the amount of change that we're seeing in the news with the volunteers that we work with. And she said, we have to ask ourselves, okay, Caroline, but what does that change make possible today that wasn't possible yesterday? What are you willing to consider? What are the new things it opens? And without being dismissive of the emotions, I really liked that. I wrote it down in a sticky on my desk so that I can help to recenter myself when I get a little bit off track. So during the next hour, my goal, and I hope your goal, is that Nick, Sora, and Mark will offer some perspectives about recognizing those challenges and considering possibilities by developing a positive mindset as best we can for navigating transitions and for thinking about our relationships and how those things can help us. Our speakers today. So Dr. Sora Friedman is a life executive career coach and a professor of international and global education at the SIT Graduate Institute. She's also someone who's known me since my earliest days in international education when we worked on projects together that were funded by USAID and USIA. Mark St. Hilaire is now a senior talent partner, corporate functions, global executive talent acquisition at Adobe. But I know him from our many years together in international education at George Washington University. My job was funded by a Title VI grant from the Department of Education, and Mark advised students on Fulbright fellowships, on Gilman in the study abroad office and in the fellowships office before transitioning to different paths. And finally, Nick Martin. Nick is the CEO of TechChange and an adjunct professor at Columbia University. If you aren't already following Nick on LinkedIn, you're missing out. He posts all the time about jobs, fellowships, scholarships, coaching, tech tools, and other tools to help elevate your career to think in different ways about jobs in international education, development, etc. So I hope that if you can take that away today to start following Nick, it's helped me reframe some of my thinking and given me several new ideas for my own career. Sora, you suggested that we start today with a bit of a mindful moment for centering and visualization before we dive into the discussion. Do you want to start us off with that?
I'd love to, Caroline, thank you. And I also just want to note that I am so sorry for the reason that we are here. And I also am taking joy in being with everybody. There is so much to learn and share. And I hope that this will be something that everybody can add to their toolkits. So thank you for having me. Thank you very much. We'll talk about ways to sustain ourselves through times of uncertainty. And this is a tool that I have learned recently that I have added to my toolkit. It will sound like a meditation, but it is a centering exercise. And the goal is not so much to calm down as to become aware. And I'll guide everybody through 2 or 3 minutes of focused awareness. So I do invite you all to start by settling in. You can stand if you like. We can't see you, so you can do whatever feels right to you. You can stay seated. Your eyes can be open or closed. Whatever feels right for you is always the only rule here. We're going to center through 4 different dimensions. And the first is length. And by length, I'm referring to the bottoms of our feet on the ground, or your bum in the chair, and your head reaching for the stars and the sky above. So I invite you to take a deep breath, and I will join you. And to focus on the feeling of your length, allowing your head to pull up, your bum or your feet to stretch down. And I invite you to be curious about the space between your vertebrae and the breath that comes with that. Length is about our presence, our dignity, and by centering in length, we can find awareness of how we're feeling about those at this moment. We can bring awareness to how we're feeling about ourselves and who we are, how we show up. What do you notice as you focus on your length and think about your dignity, your presence at work, in your personal life, all together? From length, we move to width, side to side. Width is representing connection and community, and it is such an important dimension within the fields of international education and development. We are all about connecting with each other, with our participants, with the world. So I invite you to bring your awareness to the edges of your body and pay attention to the actual feelings of pressure, temperature, sensation. How do the clothes feel against your edges of your arms or your legs, the edges of your core? What sensations are you feeling? What are you thinking about your community? Imagine connecting with all of the 260 some people who are right here, or those within your office, within your programs, your family, your community. How do you connect with them? From width, we move into the dimension of depth, back to front. We think about the feelings on our back, maybe the feeling of a chair against your back or the clothes against your back, becoming aware of perhaps an itch in your back or the sensation of air on your back. This is representing your history, your story, how you have gotten to where you are now. Bring your awareness to this path that you've tread all of these years, through schooling, through preparation, through training. Who were your teachers? Who were your mentors? Where have you lived? What are the many places you have called home? And connect from back to your front. Again, bringing awareness to the front of your body, the front of your core, your chest, your belly, the front of your legs. What do you feel? What sensations are there? And how do they land for you today? We are in a time of uncertainty, and to ask someone to focus on their future, what it might look like, might feel difficult. Just be aware of whatever that feeling is for you. Bring curiosity about what it might be. See how that feels within you and settles for you. And let that connect with the fourth dimension of purpose. What is your North Star? Maybe right now you're focused on the North Star of getting a new job. What does that job represent for you? What will it bring you? What will be capable because of that? And allow all of that to rise into your North Star. And I invite you to make a note of that North Star. Sometimes they're easy to lose sight of, especially in a time of uncertainty. I have a sticky note with mine, and I'm not just saying it, it's right here. And I refer to it frequently when I'm feeling challenged. I invite you to share that North Star with yourself in times of challenge, in times of accomplishment, and when a bit of inspiration is necessary. So hopefully we will give you some tools to meet that inspiration. Caroline, thank you for making the space for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sora. Thanks for, I was visioning a compass as you took us through that, right? A compass that ultimately allows me to focus in the direction that I might need to be pointed. So thanks for starting us off in that different kind of way to push aside the things that might be peppering us from beyond these screens so that we can focus on what we're here to talk about today. Thank you. I'll start us off by asking each of you to actually give a few opening remarks. What are your observations about career uncertainty right now, about the sectors that you work in? What are you seeing and hearing from your colleagues? And I'll start with you, Mark.
Thank you, and thank you, Caroline, for having me here. I mean, before I jump into the sort of the observations of insecurity and what I'm hearing from friends and colleagues, of which, even though I call myself a retired international educator, a lot of my networks are many of you on this call. And so a lot of what I'm hearing is the purpose of why we're all here. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of furloughs, and a lot of layoffs. But before I really jump in, I mean, the one thing I think it is also important to think about, and somewhat related to what Sora talked about, but maybe a little bit closer to home, is we have to acknowledge not just the uncertainty, but the negative emotions that we're all feeling right now. I think the brain is a fascinating muscle because obviously we use our brains to do our work. It gives us, help us process information. But the brain is built for two things: control and to make you comfortable. And in a time of uncertainty, what's always easiest is to, okay, let me focus on my resume, or let me focus on this, let me focus on that. But I think in order for us to do that work, we really have to take a step back and acknowledge those unpleasant emotions and sit with them. Acknowledge the sense of fear. Acknowledge the fact that there are days I feel sad, I feel overwhelmed. To acknowledge that there are days where I feel just pissed off. I mean, I've devoted my life to this work, and in the stroke of a pen, it seems like it's uncertain whether it's going to come back. Now, again, I think it's important to be able to take yourself out of sitting with those emotions as well, whether it's you take the time to journal at a particular time of day, or journal when you are feeling those strong emotions, or whether you have an activity that you do to help you with processing the emotions, or leaning on your faith community, whatever that is. For everyone, it's going to look different. But I do think in this time of uncertainty where we're questioning everything, it is important to acknowledge and be okay with the fact that, yeah, there are going to be days where I can't think about looking for a new job because I just feel sad right now. And that is okay. And so I think we also need to give ourselves the permission to really feel what we're feeling, because I think what we all collectively are dealing with is a form of grief. And I think grief is not a linear thing, but to get through grief, any researcher you listen to who talks about grief is you have to sit with it and you have to acknowledge what's happening before you can move forward to the more resilient and positive exercises.
Mark. Thanks, Mark. That acknowledgement
Yeah.
is very important. Nick, what about for you? You work with a lot of folks in international and global development. You have students at Columbia. What is the observation you have about how they're feeling from a career perspective?
Yeah, kind of a unique position for me to be in. Great to be here, everybody. I just want to first just thank Caroline and NAFSA for organizing us and bringing us together today, for Sora and leading that beautiful exercise and framing. I don't think we do that enough, especially in these kinds of formats. And I would, maybe just start by echoing Mark. Like, I do think that this is a collective experience of grief and trauma, and trying to not sit with that or rush to solve it or feel good again too quickly, which I am seeing quite a bit of across my different pockets and communities, can be really challenging. I think we are in for a marathon more than a sprint here with the job search journey for most folks, which we'll talk more tactically about in this webinar. But that sort of mental positioning is important to establish and revisit pretty regularly throughout this process. So, I come at this from a couple of different angles. I run a company called TechChange. We are a USAID subcontractor that does a lot of global development, education, and training work. And a lot of our contracts disappeared, and I've had to, unfortunately lay off large numbers of amazing humans in my team. I'm also a professor, and I'm sort of like thinking about this from the vantage point of students graduating into this environment who are scared and uncertain about what the career that they have been preparing for might look like now that so much has changed. And then lastly, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, really at the intersection of people sharing and commiserating and trying to rebuild pieces of this community, and have some insights which we can go deeper into over the course of this experience together. But I'm seeing and hearing a lot, which I hope to bring to y'all today. But I just wanted to maybe start there and introduce myself.
And Sora, we'll go to you. We know you a little bit from the exercise and what types of things you help us to do, but tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing.
Thanks. I am hearing the same emotions, but especially around fear, nervousness, lack of control. As so many of us are involved in program design, and as an international educator, I have led groups. We are always anticipating the future so that we're prepared for anything. But here it's hard to anticipate the future because so much is out of our control. So there's a lot of new going on as well. That's a new place to be for a lot of people. And I'm hearing a lot of fear about that. I am also hearing a lot of willingness to stretch and grow, even from people who thought that they probably were done stretching professionally or thinking about change, people who are more senior in their careers. It's a time that's asking us to think a little bit differently, to open our minds to new skills. And I made some notes in advance: new skills, resources, and ideas, and being open to that. So that's what I'm hearing.
And thanks for getting us to that as well, Sora, right? So I think you do need to acknowledge the fear, the frustration, the not taking it personally at the moment, because none of this is personal, right? It's not something that was done wrong. For my friends who have been let go in a probationary period, right? They haven't necessarily done something wrong. But then to think about what are the tools. I know when I'm frustrated, it helps to have some ideas of what can I do right now? What's the thing I can do so that I'm not on the couch, so that I'm not wallowing, that I'm thinking about what's possible. So sorry that your comment sort of got us to that point, acknowledgement, and then what are you hearing in terms of how people are willing to try new things and to help each other? We do talk about resilience a lot, I know, with our students, right? Students are traveling, they're doing things, we encourage them to be resilient, and now we have to think about that resilience ourselves. So what strategies would you offer? Sora, we'll start with you. What strategies would you offer for keeping this positive mindset, for reminding ourselves of the skills we encourage in others, how to find those resilient skills in ourselves?
I've got two thoughts. First is to use whatever tools work for you, like the centering exercise or meditation or walking outside, or, it sounds so trite, playing with puppies, whatever it is. Find what works for you and do it. When I'm caught in a whirlwind of angst and stress, I often forget to do what I know can bring me some peace and calm. So I just really want to underscore that again. And secondly is then taking proactive steps. And I know we'll get to some tips for career change, career search a little later. There's a handout that NAFSA is going to post as well. But there are a lot of concrete things that somebody can do. And one of the perhaps most self-affirming, interesting, and appropriate at this moment is to take stock again of your journey so far, identifying where you've been, and I don't mean geographically, although that can be important for this group, but where you've been in terms of your education, growth, and accomplishments, who you are, and I'll give you some categories for deeper thinking about that as well, and to get your tools in order so that you're ready to take action if you find yourself needing to take action.
Thank you. Mark, when you and I were talking together about this moment, we talked a lot about subject and skills, right? And how some of us in international education can get focused like I do this. I've worked in study abroad. That's what my thing is. But you and I talked about changing the frame on that, which also feels like an action that I can take that's very positive. So can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so the conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago was mainly this idea of when you're looking at transitioning or you're thinking of what's next, a useful exercise to think about is stripping away the subject matter, like purely taking away, oh, I'm a international higher ed, or I'm study abroad, or I'm professional exchanges. Take that away. But thinking very functionally around what do you actually do? So yes, you might be a program manager for this particular fellowship program, but at the end of the day, you're working in recruiting, project management, and if you're on the financial side of things, you're a budget analyst, or you are a budget or financial planning and analysis specialist. And I think one of the things that, at least for me, when I've thought of different career transitions and how to keep that positivity mindset, is to really strip away what my subject matter is and focusing on, okay, no, this is my actual function. Because once you're able to identify what your function is, what you actually find is that there are a lot of possibilities of industries that need said function. And I think that's one way that I've found people in this moment and friends and colleagues being able to have a little bit more of hope, is this idea of, okay, well, functionally, this is what I do. So what are other comparable industries that would need these particular functions?
And I want to acknowledge that's not easy to do. Our identity.
And no, and that's why we're here. Yeah, exactly. It's certainly
For a
not
long
easy to do. I
time
don't
has
want to. Yeah.
been this is who I am, right? It becomes so much a part of us. I'm going to call out to you as well, and my friend Elena will post in the chat some information about the NAFSA competencies, because those are not about the subject that you know, but more about what you do in the moment, and it might help you think about vocabulary that you use to describe those skills that are less jargony and more transferable. That was one of our goals in creating this. Nick, what for you about positivity or making a transition with who you are, like how do I present myself in terms of subject versus function?
Yeah, I might echo a little bit of what Sora shared and then try and build off Mark's comments a bit. So I have a LinkedIn course called How to Build a Career of Positive Social Impact. And it's very short, it's a half an hour, you can take it on LinkedIn. But one of the activities is starting with identifying your core values in the moment as a human. And it's sort of a whittling down of like, you have all these options and like, but what are the 3 or 2 that really are the most meaningful for you in that moment? And doing that exercise with an eye towards the work that you care about and also the human that you are, the whole self, your family, your passions, your joys, and all those other things can be a really helpful exercise to start with. Because what I don't think you should do is go out and apply for 100 jobs if you're furloughed or laid off. I think that is kind of a knee-jerk reaction rooted in fear, and it generally doesn't work super well. So a values-based exercise to identify those core values. I think Mark's right on with transferable skills. How do you reframe what you've been doing as amazing international educators in your journey that might be coded differently or codified differently in a private sector, verbiage, whatever it is. I think those transferable skills are key. The thing I would add is to really think about building your support system and the relationships and the scaffolding around you on this journey. A lot of people are like, oh crap, I got to go back and network now that I don't have a job. And there's, again, this sort of knee jerk, I got to go send a bunch of LinkedIn connections. I would invite you to think about it differently. How do you build a support system around you to support you on this journey? How do you build relationships with people that can be real humans in the real world or online in a platform like LinkedIn? And how do you orient your activity towards one of generosity versus extraction? Because I do think that if you, and we can talk tactically about what I mean by that, but like if you are out there on LinkedIn trying to build community, trying to give whatever knowledge and skills you have to others, I think you will find how quickly that does translate into some really powerful opportunities for you as a professional.
So I want to go a little bit further with you, Nick, and that, Nick, because what I've appreciated about some of your link posts is about that community building, finding your network. Network is, I don't know, makes people think of cocktails. I like strategic friendliness. That's like sometimes what I like to call it, right? Because you are thinking, you're being intentional, but you're trying to think about what you can add, what you can get in this relationship. But tell me a little bit more about creating community right now that might help you with career uncertainty. And especially someone asked a question in preparing for this interview via the registration about creating trust within that community as you go back to try and create it.
Yeah, look, I think there's a hunger for all of us to, again, process what we're going through collectively, but also to connect with each other. So that baseline is already there. And a platform like LinkedIn, with all of its imperfections and challenges, is as good a place as any to do this. But I think there's a couple of strategies that you could employ if you are somebody who's kind of ready for this part of your journey to build out some of these relationships. I say one of the most underutilized things on LinkedIn is the post itself. I think we're kind of trying to just send connections into the ether and hope that the person at the company that we want to work for accepts those connections and does an informational interview. Again, that can work, but another way to do that is to follow thought leaders in a company where you might have identified you want to work with and start engaging with their posts and start trying to pick content and ideas that you feel confident in sharing. And it can be a vulnerable share. It doesn't have to be, I'm an expert in this thing. Start dialogues. When all of this happened, with USAID getting shut down, I had no idea what to do. And I was like, all right, what is my orientation? And I decided in the first couple of days, I'm just going to put a giant thread together of asks and offers. What do people want, and what are people willing to offer? And see who responds. And just that little act of me not really knowing what to do and putting something out there led to all kinds of connections happening in the comments. So I want to take the pressure off of yourself to be an expert all the time in a post and start to shift that into being curious, trying to understand and make sense of what's happening on the landscape of your job, of your organization, of our field. And use that as a way to connect rather than just sending folks those connection requests. I think that's a powerful, underutilized tactic. Over.
I'd add something else to that, sending those connects. A mentor of mine in international education, she was actually my first boss at IIE, gave me the best piece of advice that's taken me through most of my career, which was this idea of people love being asked for advice. There's something, almost a boost to the ego when it's like, oh, you think I'm important enough to ask advice of? Leverage that human, that piece of human behavior. The idea of, you want to be strategic about it, but I think you have to be vulnerable and be able to say, I'm seeking advice for X, Y, and Z reason, and lean on what I would call your close connections, friends, family, people that you have close working relationships as a starting point. Because these are going to be the community of people that actually have a vested interest in helping you, and they want to see you be successful. But I think there is something to be said for being vulnerable and being transparent about, I would love your advice on this for X, Y, and Z reason.
And I will follow that up with a couple of very practical tips about informational interviews, which are by far one of the best strategies at a time like this. Ask for 30 minutes of someone's time. People will give 30 minutes. They won't commit to 60, but leave a full hour, because once they're talking about themselves, they'll want to go on and on. Have 3 or 4 key questions ready to go. How did you get to where you are now? What skills do you use in your day-to-day work? What do you know now that you didn't know 5 years ago, 1 year ago, or when you started in the field? What's happening within your organization now? And what suggestions do you have? That will get you an hour of conversation. Be sure and send a thank you note. It sounds so trite to say it, but it doesn't always happen. And that is what will log you into somebody's brain, so that if they have an opening that might be a match, they will then reach out to you. And lastly, everybody knows we're asking for informational interviews because we're thinking about our futures. But if you ask somebody to spend time with you because you need a job, they're probably getting 10 questions like that. Tell them that you're preparing for the future. It's not a lie, you're being honest, and focus on them, as you said, Mark. And that will get you a lot of information to work with and then to process.
Thank you for adding that bit about letting me know what happens in that future, right? If I've spent the time on an informational interview, I want to hear from you when you finally landed that job. Chances are we'll run into each other at a conference if you're in international education, and I'll think, gee, I didn't know you were working at X place. So I like that follow-up to that. Really shows me someone who's invested in relationships, which are so important in this field. What if I'm, though, like a real introvert? Like some of the folks who registered for this webinar indicated that they've been in their current role for less than 5 years, right? So I'm going to guess most of us on this panel are a little bit older than that. Can we remember back to when we were newer in this and how we went about establishing those connections? Yes, with informational interviews, but what are some other ways that someone who doesn't have an extensive network might look to grow that right now?
I mean, I would say in some respects, this is a moment that's made for the introvert, because when most of us were doing these informational interviews, I mean, we had to either talk to the person in person, or you had to, there was a lot of in person. Whereas now, I think to Nick's point earlier, liking a person's content, following them. I mean, LinkedIn has a feature now where you don't even have to send a connection request. You can just follow someone. That in and of itself is a way of engagement. So I would almost say to someone who's maybe more on the introverted side, look at the, at the risk of sounding contradictory, look at the passive ways of engaging individuals that you find interesting, whose profiles you find interesting, who have career trajectories that maybe you'd like to emulate and mirror. The other thing I would say is, don't always think about it in the context of the field that you're in. Some of the best networking opportunities I've had have come from things that have nothing to do with my work, but in fact have come from volunteer opportunities that I'm involved in that have nothing to do with international education. But in the course of conversation, you find out that these individuals either are in the same industry as you, or in some cases, they're in industries that sound interesting and appealing. So I also think there's something to be said for networking in a space where you feel comfortable. So if, for example, I volunteer with animal shelters from time to time, that's a space where I feel very comfortable. And ironically, that's where a lot of networking for me has happened, because in a strange way, I'm not thinking about work, but yet somehow you're sitting there with this animal, and you just strike up a conversation. It's like, oh, well, what do you do when you're not here at the shelter?
Mark, I want to point out also, not just because I work at NAFSA and there's lots of volunteering, but I have been able to grow skill sets through volunteering, right? So serving on the board of trustees at my church, I didn't know how to read profits and loss statements or do some of those financial things, and I wasn't going to get them in this job. So I looked to something like that, or a student who says, I'm not working right now. What do I do? You volunteer to read fellowship applications for the Fund for Education Abroad, right? So you keep those skills oiled, or you learn new skills by maybe taking something that you wouldn't normal, it's not international education, but you still have a way to build those skills that you might need. So I love that working at a shelter or taking a different type of volunteer role that builds a skill that you don't have can be a positive way to kind of continue your learning and your growth. And you bring that into whatever job you might take, gives you a new anecdote for your interview as well. Nick, Sora, anything you want to tag on to that?
Somebody asked about anticipating the end of this crazy time and how to be ready for that. And Caroline, your comment connects with it beautifully. A question to ask oneself is, how do I want to be able to describe what I did during this time? What story do I want to be able to tell when this is over? And for some people, it's actually ending sooner because grant monies are finally being released, at least for a short time. People are finding jobs, perhaps in a little bit of a different sector, still related to education, or in another area of service, if that's important to somebody. So think about the story that you want to be able to tell, whether it's 6 months from now or 3.5 years from now. And then that will give you some direction in thinking about how you want to use this time. For some people, it might be returning to school. And especially, I know we have a lot of entry level or people with, 1 to 6 or 7 years of experience. This could be a time to look at what kind of next degree or trainings and certifications would serve you well. And sometimes there's something outside of what seems obvious, like AI. There was a question about AI. We know that it's an important skill in education. We're not clear yet. So getting ahead of that curve to develop some expertise in that area. Yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Sorry. The handout that was posted, and just scroll up in the chat function to find it, or it's attached to the webinar, will lead you through a couple of exercises that in some ways seem like they're taking you back to the beginning. And if you haven't done them yet, that's important. And for those of you who are mid or senior level in your careers, this is a good time to go back to the beginning because you'll gain some new insights. So I just want to note some of the questions that it's asking, again, in addition to the questions about the different kinds of identities that you carry and that you claim that are part of who you are things about what you have done, like Nick and Mark were talking about. What skills do you have? And being as crystal clear about what you have done and what you can do as possible. I was just working with a client who asked me to review their resume and hadn't listed the years that she had spent taking care of her elderly parents. And as we were reflecting on that, I was saying, wait, did you manage household finances? Yeah. Oh, budget skills. Were you working with medical professionals? Oh, healthcare skills and crisis management skills. Were you working with family, extended family? Oh, advising and counseling skills. And all of a sudden, her resume is half a page longer, not because she's playing a card, but because she has those capacities. She can do that. And she has done it in the most sensitive of situations. So thinking about all of that, the networking we've talked about, and I invite everybody to think about stretching your networking as well. For the first time ever, I moved to West Virginia about 6 years ago from Vermont, and it's taken me this long. I'm sad to say and proud to say I went to a local networking event this past weekend at the local university, and already am following people and being followed by people that I met there and have lunch dates with 2 of them as well. So I'm expanding my network. I've always thought I'm a virtual person. Hey, I'm back to face, and it is so good. And lastly is thinking about action planning, identifying even just 2 or 3 concrete steps that you can take, and doing something concrete likely will help you regain some footing and bring that feeling of accomplishment back if it's been a while since you've felt that.
Because you mentioned resumes, I wanted to ask this group real quick. Resumes, functional resumes, chronological resumes. What's your vote on the differences there? Because we're talking about presenting skills in a different way. So as an employer, when you get those things, what do you prefer?
I mean, I'll just say all the above because it's going to really depend on what you're applying for. I mean, if you're applying for things in international education, then no, a chronological resume would make sense because that is your home discipline. That is what your background has been in. Whereas if you're doing more of a career pivot, then yeah, you have to do more of a functional resume because at that point, you have to show the transferability of skills. So I would say I mean, there's no one right way to do a resume. So that's the thing. But resumes are like opinions, and there are 1,000 of them. So it's more a function of picking the resume that makes sense for what you're applying to. I think the things you want to keep in mind, regardless of whether you do a chronological or functional or, I mean, I hate to say it, even if you're doing a government resume, whatever the template is, you want to ensure that it is easy to read. Like you have to always write it with the reviewer in mind. And I always say that when you're writing your resume to help focus things, assume that it's a recruiter like me, where I have 500 of these resumes I have to get through, and assume it's 4:59 on a Friday. And you're the 499th resume that is keeping me from happy hour. That's what I always say to folks when they're trying to write a resume. As I said, think as streamlined as possible so that if 3/4 of this thing doesn't get read in the first 10 seconds, I already have a good sense of, oh, wow, okay, this person has the functional skill set. Let's move them on.
Thanks, Mark. That was one of the questions we got, was about how to strip away the subject matter to focus on the transferable skills when we've identified with that subject matter, but also how to make yourself visible to Mark, who's it's 4:59, 500 resumes, and the beer's waiting over there. I mean, I'm gonna keep you in mind now when I'm thinking about that. But what are some tips for making it stand out in that pile?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think you really want to take a concrete look, because here's the thing. A job description is usually a laundry list, but you can tell in a job description what matters the most, because sometimes you'll see redundant, repetitive bullet points in a job description. Those are probably the things that you want to emphasize, because those are things that are probably the most important. In my experience with a job description, the most important stuff is towards the top of the job description. So in a resume, it's not about saying, oh, I can do these 10,000 things, but really focusing on, okay, what are the essential top 3, and really doubling down on, I can do those top 3 things well. And there is actually a tool that I've used in the past. I'll put it in the, and some of you may be familiar with it. It's called JobScan.co. I'll put it in the chat here. I've found this tool to be really useful. Although, hold on, I probably messed up the link, but I'll put it in a moment. But what I like about that particular tool is that you can put a job description in, and then you can put your resume in, and it will tell you with a decent amount of accuracy where the gaps are. And then that will help you tailor your resume to the position itself.
There's what I see as the helpful use of AI when I'm confused about what do I do? What do I do with this? Another question that came in, Nick, that I'm hoping you might be able to shed some advice on is, how do we address being furloughed in an interview and a cover letter? And how do we state our affiliation when we're in that in-between space? Am I still affiliated with NAFSA? If I've been furloughed from NAFSA, like how do I present that in a cover letter or an interview that in a way that feels authentic and truthful?
Yeah, look, I think now is the time for authenticity. This is nobody's fault. This is a mass event that we're all affected by. I think employers are very empathetic to that. Hiring managers are, but as Mark said, that there's a lot of competition for fewer jobs if we're talking about, our sector, international education, certainly global development. So, I err on the side of being honest, being open, being transparent. No need to hide this, but also do all the other things around giving yourself the best chance to get the job by networking, by building an authentic digital presence. I think these other strategies, I think, have a bit more, in my mind, a little bit more weight, or should be weighted more heavily in this new world order, if you're out there looking for jobs. And then I also saw a post about, how do we support our staff and be honest with them in this era? And I tell you, this is something I am living in real time, is just terrible. We've laid off, probably about half our staff, or small firm at TechChange, just because of the contracts we had. I will say, compared to other times where I've had to do this in my life, it's been easier in a sense. Like, again, this is an external event that has cataclysmically changed how we operate in our sector. And generally I've found that people are understanding. They're sad. There's a lot of fear. But if you're a manager, trying to just try to be empathetic and support them, and also process your own journey and your own fear as best you can. I'm saying to a lot of folks, like, look, like, I am where I am. We are where we are as a business. But like, if I have the opportunity to hire you again in another chapter, I'm going to do it because I love working with you. And so, and then doing the best you can to be supportive of them as they look for other work. So, I do think we're in a unique position as a sector and a field to help each other because of the cruelty and the velocity at which this has happened to us. We have a unique opportunity to express care and concern and connect with humans together. And that applies to those of you out there that are trying to manage this with your employees.
May I add 2 ideas to that, Caroline?
Please.
First is that for employees who are still part of your team, make a space for sharing and for conversation. So I'm thinking back to that beer at 4:59 that you mentioned, Mark. Over lunch one day, bring in whatever, get lunch for everybody, bring in the donuts or the bottles of wine at 4 o'clock, and have an agenda-free space for people to talk and share and emote, because they need to do that even in the workplace. And if you make a safe space just to listen or brainstorm or share ideas, it will be appreciated. They'll feel heard, and they will see you as the authentic leader that you are. And the other is, which you'll have to think strategically about this, but I suspect it could be helpful if managers were to write letters of recommendation to give to an employee when they are being laid off. Don't wait for someone to ask. And it means that you need to delegate responsibility, because if you're laying off a team of 25, it's hard to write 25 letters, but ask everybody to prepare one for the 4 or 5 people who report to them, and have it be detailed and honest, and owning this is why this person was laid off, this is what they did, and this is what they can do, and you should hire them, because if it weren't for this crazy time, they would still be working for me. What a gift to give to somebody that they can include with an application that will make that application stand out from others as well.
Maybe help them think about their skills that you've noticed to
Mhm.
help them kind of prepare those things as well. And of course, there's ways on LinkedIn where you can do a smaller scale recommendations of other people when you've noticed something that they've done. I like that. One of the questions that came in, that I had a thought on, and I hope you do too, is strategies for being resilient and maintaining your confidence when you face multiple rejections. And I was thinking about this. I was helping my 17-year-old prepare for his first job interview. And I said, you have to remember that me and Dad got rejected from almost all of the interviews we've ever done, except for the one where we got the job, right? So almost all the time you interview for so many things, but then so we have skills. We've dealt with that before, unless you're like really amazing. We've all dealt with some sort of rejection from getting the job at different points. But how do we call on that? We're with fewer jobs, we're likely to feel like we're facing rejection all the time. So strategies for still being confident in what we know and who we are.
I mean, again, I think in some respects, and it's hard. I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard not to take it personal, but you really have to try your best to look at this purely as a numbers game. It is a numbers game, number one. Number two, I also think, and this is what is exciting about this moment, and we alluded to it earlier, is that this moment, and I would say this isn't an unprecedented moment entirely, although the speed at which this is happening is. But Carolyn, all of us collectively were talking earlier, is that the early days of the pandemic 5 years ago, we were in similar moments where people were being furloughed in this way. And what I found was exciting is that it forced people to not just look at different industries, but even look at different types of companies as well. So looking at companies, you're like, oh, well, I had no idea this company did this. I had no idea that, there's a field of work called customer success, which is somewhat applicable to doing work in advising with students and things like that, albeit you have to use the different terminology. So I would say one of the things that certainly does help with keeping that positive mindset is realizing, okay, it's a numbers game. You can't escape that, but also using it as a moment to be curious and to look at companies and organizations that you wouldn't have thought of in a different time because you would have had no need to. So I think that in my experience has helped a lot of people I know really think about, oh, there's actually more out there than I think of. Because I think in these moments, what is a danger is you'll look at the same 5 companies. You'll think, okay, I want to go into tech. So what am I going to do? I'm going to look at Microsoft. I'm going to look at Amazon. I'm going to look at Google. And it's like, well, everybody wants to work at those places. Even people who have been in tech a long time want to work at those places. But what are companies that do similar work? And again, value the function that you all have done the work to identify that you have can help.
I was going to add two quick things to that because I think Mark's right that you do need to build that scaffold, that support network around you, be intentional about where you're applying, be a little more expansive in where you're applying. The two things I would add would be if you're older in your career, and maybe if you're younger, but definitely if you're older and you've been in the same job for a while, I would highly recommend spending a couple sessions with a career coach. This is a practice that I think is being normed a bit more. It sounds like, Sora, you're a coach yourself. I was a skeptic for many years. I did leadership coaching during the pandemic when we were growing as a firm, and I can't tell you how transformative it was. So whether you're in transition or whether you're trying to grow in a career, I would definitely think seriously about that. And then if I were in the early grad or currently in grad school or 0 to 5 in my career, I would look seriously at the fellowship world. I put a post in the chat about a post I did on LinkedIn that got a lot of attention, but professional fellowships, early career stuff, some of these are being affected by government funding, so you do have to do your research. And I know the international ed folks have been running a lot of these, but maybe it's time for you to look at one for yourself if you've been in this field. And there are a lot of fellowships that take you to other fields. And so trying to use that as a bridge could be really interesting. I've seen a lot of folks, for instance, do like the Code for America Fellowship, these kinds of interesting, maybe I want to go from international ed to something a bit more techy, but I still want to keep that public service angle. And there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of them that don't do a great job marketing. I try to get the word out where I can. So as you're looking for jobs, I would keep an eye towards that world and see which ones are still going. Yes, they're competitive, but that could be a great way to build a network, build a bridge to another sector, without just jumping back into the career hunt.
I'd,
Getting,
I'd also say one last thing.
Yeah.
It's never too late, regardless of where you are in your career, to lean on your academic alumni network as well. I think sometimes, especially those of us who've been in the field for a long time, we forget, oh wait, we went to a university. We are alumni. God knows we all paid good amounts of money to go to these places. You should use a lot of those alumni resources as well. And I would say, especially those of you who are earlier in your career as well, because you have more recent affiliation with these places. In fact, there may be resources that are available to you than somebody who has been graduated maybe decades ago.
I love that, Mark. I mean, the last time I saw you, we were on a alumni panel for our grad program, and you do, the career coach is a great suggestion, Nick, but and also your career office at your former institution might be willing to look at that resume for you. So that might be a low cost way to go. We're coming towards the end of the hour, and I knew we would have so much to talk about that we didn't have time to get to all the questions, but maybe you saw something in there, Sora, Nick, Mark, that you want to answer, or just a few words as we close out before I give a little bit of information on what the folks can do next. So closing thoughts, or if you saw a burning question in the Q&A.
Just to say, remember, the resume is a means to an end. I know I've seen so many people focus on, I got to get my resume right and perfect. And yeah, you want to make sure it's free of typos and easy to read. But remember, once you get that phone call and someone wants to interview you, whether it's a phone screen, once you're in the interview process, no one's really looking at the resume again. They want to know the story behind the resume. So I would say you're spending, yes, you want to take time to craft a good resume or a series of resumes, but really focus it on curiosity and networking. I think that is, even though that's a much longer term exercise, it has much greater return on investment than the resume, which is pretty transactional and so on.
I will build on that by encouraging people to practice the interview. And it goes back to knowing what story you want to share, what part of your background is most relevant for the position you're interviewing with. And then with friends, with colleagues, with partners, whomever, practice answering questions verbally or in front of a camera. Nothing will serve you better than knowing how to answer questions in advance, plus being authentic when you do.
I would just add real quickly, I think we haven't talked a ton about skills building and a little bit about grad school. I would probably opt for short targeted courses over large expensive grad programs at almost any stage of a career, but do your math, do your homework, figure out what that journey means for you. Tons of great free and low cost courses out there on analytics, data science, AI. I know these can be buzzy and annoying, but like there is some real skill that you can learn to augment your abilities. And I think you might be surprised at how someone like you and your experience with international education might be able to connect some great dots to some of this new technology in ways you might not have anticipated. So I would very much encourage folks down that path as well.
Thanks all. And Nick, I'm going to get you to send me a link to that course that you mentioned on LinkedIn earlier, because I think.
Yeah, I'll do that for the chat as well. LinkedIn learning course. Yeah.
Okay. As we close out today, I wanted to bring a couple of things to the attention of the community that's joining us today. First is that you saw on the slides while you were waiting, it was a coupon code for our publication Careers in International Education, which Sora co-authored with Amir Reza. So it's 25% off that for you. And in fact, the handout that she provided is part of a section in here about action plan and self-assessment. So I really think that can be used at any stage of your career. Sora, the suggestion to practice the hiring manager questions, which is a free download for NAFSA members, gives you actual questions based on these different skills, not subject. So you can practice those answers from things that you know outside of international education as a way to help you think about what is it that I know how to do? What are my functional strengths, as Mark mentioned. The NAFSA Careers site is our online job site that is free for job seekers, and you can filter and set up alerts by location, role, or other unique qualifications. So I commend that to you. If you're going to be joining us in San Diego for the NAFSA 2025 annual conference, there's a whole career center program on offer, including meeting with a career coach during the conference. And if you're thinking about it and you're finding yourself in a financial moment, volunteering at the conference can get you a partial or full refund of a reimbursement of your registration costs. So if you can find a friend and find your way there, you'll be able to do some of this networking, some of this increasing your learning, meeting with a career coach, and maybe practicing, talking about how are you going to talk about how you're laid off, right? You'll get a chance to practice that in a very welcoming environment. The online communities available at network.nafsa.org are also great ways to share information, to get ideas from different people, and those are open to anyone, regardless of NAFSA membership. I hope that perhaps the ideas shared today will help you maybe think about what that North Star is, to help keep you focused, to write that sticky and keep it on your desk. And maybe give you 1 or 2 things to help you answer that question I posed when we start. Things are hard, and there are emotions that we're dealing with. It's sometimes you need to tune out the news, you need to do this centering, this focusing. But in the spirit of recognizing that challenge and moving forward, I'd like you to again think about, what does this time of change make possible for you in your career? What does this change make possible? And I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for joining us today. I love the questions in the chat. We'll be sending the recording, some of the resources that were mentioned today, out to you and other folks who registered for this webinar. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.